Stephanie.
Grandma.
After 14 years, Final Destination has finally returned to our screens, and this sixth installment shows that the wait was well worth it. Bloodlines certainly lives up to its name. It is gory, deftly written, and full of gripping deaths. Stephanie is the protagonist of the novel. One night in 1968, she is plagued by images of her grandmother, Iris, while spending a night with her fiancé. Iris visits the Skyview, an opulent and costly tower that ultimately proves to be catastrophic for everyone. A sarcastic child tosses a penny from the roof, which sets off a chain of events that breaks the glass floor, destroys half the tower with an explosion, kills many people inside with a fireball, and finally brings the entire structure crashing down. A series of events culminate in the death of every member of the family, as Stephanie starts to look into the underlying reason of the visions she is now having. As we find out later in the film, Iris's foresight saved many lives that night, and she did not perish in the Skyview Tower. Her intuition allowed her to prevent the dancers from falling through the floor, put out the fire, and eventually save everyone. Iris lived through this ordeal and gave birth to her child, but she chose to spend decades protecting herself in her cabin, doing everything she could to stave off death. Regretfully, she was ultimately diagnosed with cancer, but JB worked at the hospital to obtain her the best care possible, helping to prolong her life. In the end, Stephanie's visions are what cause Iris to fail, and the series of events to begin. Although it isn't stated clearly, the creature managed to get beyond death's apparent inability to reach Iris. That would account for the nefarious visions Stephanie began to see. Her perseverance eventually pays off, as Stephanie leaves to visit Iris at her cabin, knowing that she would go look into it. Following Iris' horrific demise, death begins to wreak havoc on the family, eventually escaping the confines of the remote cottage and having the freedom to target anybody it wants. Until Patriarch Howard gets a little too close to a lawnmower. The family doesn't trust her at first. After then, they begin to listen. Eric, however, escapes death at first, barely escaping disaster at the tattoo parlor, when Howard's wife, Brenda, confesses that she had an affair and that he is not pure-blooded. The reason for this is quickly made clear. But next is Julia, who is crushed to death in a truck outside, just as Stephanie foretells. It's interesting to note, however, that the subsequent death is both predestined and a form of retribution for death. The death of Bobby, the youngest sibling, becomes entangled with that of Eric, who tries to thwart death's plot with fatal results. After discovering the lone survivor named JB in Iris's notebook, Bobby and Eric decide to play a prank on death. This is actually the famous William Bloodworth, the surviving child from the original 1968 premonition we witnessed with Iris, as we eventually discover. JB, who was only a young boy at the time, was among the last to pass away during this period. At the conclusion of the premonition, he and Iris fell to their deaths. He clarifies that since Iris is no longer among us, death will first target him and then proceed through her family. He supports Stephanie's theory by witnessing the same people who have visited him over the years. Iris successfully resisted death in her cabin for so long that the Skyview survivors went on to start families, illustrating how bloodlines connect everything. Then, using Kimberly's experience in Final Destination 2 as an example, Bloodworth explains that they can evade death if one of them dies and resurrects. Death would be stopped in its tracks by this. After surviving in 1968, and seeing that all of the survivors and their families were beginning to die off, Bloodworth met Iris off-screen and collaborated with her to learn about death, how to survive it and how to defeat it, with the newspaper clips showcasing scenes from earlier Final Destination movies, and the order perhaps being the grandchildren of the Skyview crash survivors. This leads directly into the closing titles. In order to be present for every film, aside from the first, Bloodworth also became a mortician in the first place. Eric's first plan is to try to kill Bobby by making him ill with peanuts, and then taking him to the emergency room while he's unconscious. In this manner, they can disrupt Death's scheme and prevent him from pursuing them. Death, however, learns of this and ends their lives in a rather gory death sequence by activating the MRI machine, turning on gravity and murdering them both. Stephanie thinks Iris's cabin is the only secure location. Regretfully, the location is an actual death trap. Death's attempt to remove the cords supporting a flower pot at the beginning of the film foreshadows the explosion that destroys Iris's cabin. However, Death succeeds this time. Stephanie, her mother Darlene, and her brother Charlie are blasted back in the subsequent explosion. Charlie is urged to save her sister, who is trapped in Darlene's capsized and water-submerged camper before Darlene is killed, with her seatbelt securely fastened and the possibility of drowning looming. Stefani faints, but Charlie tries to bring her back to consciousness. It, for the time being at least, seems to have halted Death's scheme, like Kimberly's survival in Final Destination 2. The two think they have escaped death when Stefani temporarily passed away and was brought back to life by resuscitation. Here, we are informed that a person is only deemed dead from drowning if they have been unconscious for more than 5 minutes. Stefani doesn't fit this description because she wasn't unconscious for that long. The identical coin that Darlene first dropped in the hospital is dropped by an elderly woman, and it ends up on a nearby railroad track where it becomes lodged between the rails. As a result, the approaching train speeds down the street, derailing and eventually crashing into the neighborhood, in a moment reminiscent of the notorious one in Final Destination 2. Stefani and Charlie manage to evade the train, but not the logs it is carrying, which bounce forward and kill them both. In the end, death strikes everyone with a ferocity, and no one makes it through this battle. We do see numerous newspaper clippings during the closing credits, which attest to numerous catastrophes and massacres throughout history. It covers every aspect of the franchise, including the disasters at industrial plants and swimming pools, and it all comes together in a tidy bow. These scenes do a fantastic job of honoring what has come before, putting a distinctive, entertaining touch on this decades-old franchise, in case there was any question that what we've seen throughout it wasn't connected.
That concludes our review for today, but the discussion is far from over. For more, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe for more videos. Keep the magic of movies alive until the next time. Signing off from FK BYTES.